Before we begin the meeting, I want to offer a friendly reminder to all board members, my colleagues, staff, and the public that these meetings are broadcast live to enable greater public participation. These broadcasts include real-time captioning as a further method to increase the accessibility of our proceedings to the community. Therefore, all speakers need to be mindful of the rate of their speech so that our captioners can fully capture and transcribe all comments for the broadcast. We ask that all speakers moderate their speed and clarify their comments. Is it clear with everyone? Great. Okay, let's open the meeting. Good afternoon. This is July 11th, 2024 Zoning Board of Adjustment regular meeting. My name is Matt Perry and I'm chair of this board. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of quorum.
Board Member Callahan?
Present.
Eicholtz?
Present.
Granz-Korsch?
Present.
Hutchins is absent. Ingram?
Aye.
Johannesson is absent. Perry?
Here.
Smikarova?
Here.
And Annie Wing is absent. There are 6 members present.
So let the record show that we do have quorum, and with that we'll proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Is there a motion to approve this agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against indicate by saying nay. Any abstentions? That motion passes and the agenda is approved. I believe all the board members have seen a copy of the minutes from the June 20th, 2024 Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All against indicate by saying nay. Any abstentions? Smirkarova abstains, and that motion passes. The minutes from the Zoning Board of Adjustment June 20th, 2024 meeting are approved. Mr. Ellis, are there any petitions or communications?
Chair Perry, members of the board, there are 2 communications this evening regarding appeals. One of the appeals that came out of the certificate of nonconforming use on 35th and Lyndale. I believe it was 3452 Lyndale Avenue South. They have withdrawn that application and are seeking to legalize minor auto repair, and will be doing that through the Planning Commission. I believe they're going to start possibly with an interim use permit to try to get started immediately, and then we'll come back for a full conditional use permit, site plan review, and anything else that might be necessary. And the other was the variance on Aldrich for the garage height. That was appealed. That was forwarded without recommendation at the Business, Housing, and Zoning Committee on Tuesday. So I'm giving you an update on that, but I don't have further information at this point.
Can you just remind us what the issue was with the last one?
That was garage height where they had designed it prior to the code change, and it would have been allowed prior to July 1st of last year, and unfortunately was no longer allowed.
So they got caught in that catch-22 of the timing?
Yes.
Yep, okay. Yes. Hey, could you turn your...
Hi, what is forwarded without comment or forwarded without?
Chair Perry, board member Smikarova, it means that they didn't decide on an outcome or recommendation from that committee. Invariably, everything goes, from the committee to council and is approved at council. They'll follow whatever the committee's recommendation is. I think there's only been one instance where something changed at council from a land use application perspective I'm aware of. In this case, it means that they didn't recommend denial or approval of the appeal, and full council will have to make that decision.
All right.
Any other questions of staff? I see none. Thank you. A reminder to applicants and others, if you're going to speak at the public hearing, please sign in on the sheet available over in the corner by the clerk. If you've not signed in, you can do so on your way out. Also to applicants and others, please contact staff after the hearing with any questions regarding your projects. And if you have something like this, could you turn it off or make it silent so as not to disturb today's proceedings? I'll read the agenda number and the address of the project and state whether it's slated for consent, continuance, withdraw, return, or discussion. And discussion items are those items that the board will take public testimony, deliberate on, and make a decision. After the public testimony has been heard for each particular discussion item, I will close the public hearing for that agenda item. Once I close the public hearing for an item, no additional public testimony will be taken, but staff may be asked to address board questions. After the public hearing for an item is closed, board members will then discuss and act on motions, and the chair only votes in the case of a tie. We have 2 items on our agenda dealing with land use. Agenda item number 5 is 3201 Pleasant Avenue. This is a discussion item. And agenda item number 6 is 4737 Colfax Avenue South. This is a discussion item. So with that, we have no consent items to concern ourselves with, and we'll move right on to 3201 Pleasant Avenue. Mr. Ouellette. So let me explain the process, how this works. Staff gives a presentation for us. Then I open the public hearing. That's when people get to speak. Then I close the public hearing. Then the board discusses it and makes motions and makes a decision.
There. Okay. Chair Perry, board members, before you today is a variance application to increase the height of an open decorative fence within the required front yard and corner side yard from 4 feet to 5 feet. The subject site is a 5,146 square foot reverse corner lot located at the southeast corner of the intersection of 32nd Street West and Pleasant Avenue. It is currently zoned Urban Neighborhood 2 and Interior 2 Built Form Overlay Districts, as are the surrounding properties. Access to the property is provided from a sidewalk and driveway along 32nd Street West along the north property line. There are hedges that screen the property from the nearby intersection. These hedges are situated in the interior side of the sidewalk, but still located within the right-of-way. The applicant is proposing to install an open decorative metal fence 5 feet in height around the property along Pleasant Avenue, 32nd Street West, and the rear and interior side property lines. The fence is to provide security for the building and occupants, as proposed portions of the fence are outside of the property lines and within the public right-of-way, but the applicant has obtained an encroachment permit from Public Works for a fence in the proposed locations. The zoning ordinance allows for fences along the front and corner side yard property lines with a maximum height of 4 feet. And like I said, the applicant is proposing a 5-foot tall fence in these locations. With respect to the variance findings, staff do not find challenges exist in complying with the ordinance, limiting fences in the required front yard and corner side yards to 4 feet. The height of the proposed fence is an aesthetic choice, and the parcel being a reverse corner lot is not a unique circumstance to the site. With respect to the second variance finding, the spirit and intent of the ordinance regulating fence height is to encourage an aesthetic environment to allow for privacy while maintaining access to light and air, and to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. Zoning requirements for maximum fence height are most restrictive in the front and corner side yards, as these are the public-facing portions of a site, which are intended to allow the most visibility and provide a welcoming streetscape. The proposed ornamental design is generally in keeping with the spirit and intent of the ordinance. However, the increased fence height and lack of a setback from the sidewalk do not preserve the pedestrian environment, and this finding is not met. Thirdly, staff finds that the proposed variance would not alter the essential character of the locality nor create potential for injury or detriment to persons or property, and this finding is met. With that, staff recommends denial of the variance to increase the maximum fence height from 4 feet to 5 feet. I conclude my presentation, and I'll stand for comments and questions.
Thanks for that presentation, Mr. Willett. Are there any questions? Board Member Grants-Korsch.
Yeah, I've got concerns because Minneapolis Public Housing Agency came forth with a similar request to go up to 6 feet with a similar transparent fence. In fact, I think it's almost the exact same design. So I'm troubled here that we approved that and thought that for the sake of safety and welfare of both the residents in and outside of the fence, that was a benefit. And so I guess I'm still having a trouble with, you said that in terms of the point number one, that it's not an aesthetic choice, when clearly a number of times in the application they referred to security. So isn't that considered a component there? And again, I need to go back to the previous project that, again, because of safety, we allowed that transparent, and this is just as transparent, is it not?
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
a similar.
Thank you, by the way.
Oh, sorry. It's a similar fence. Board Member Grants-Korsch. It's a similar fence. The previous variance for the fence, that property, one of the unique circumstances was that it had 3 street frontages, which is a very unique instance within the city. So it wasn't just limited to security concerns. So that is a major difference between those two applications. With respect to the aesthetic choice, the first variance finding, I don't believe relates to security. So that's why that wasn't incorporated as part of the findings for the first.
Any other questions of staff? I don't see any. Thanks. Is the applicant present? If you want to step up, give your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Shauna Rooney, and I'm representing the applicant here today for the variance. The request has to do with both safety and aesthetics. The dwelling itself is obviously an old church that's been rehabilitated and is now a rental unit. And the city was really kind of built around the church. And so as you can see, there's not a lot of room and space between the sidewalk area and the dwelling itself. So there's a safety component to it, as well as an aesthetic preference. The fence that we'd like to implement is much more decorative than some of the other 4-foot chain link fence options. And so those are really kind of the two things that we're looking for from a variance standpoint.
Okay. Are there any questions of Ms. Rooney? So one thing, I have a question.
Sure.
So there are decorative fences other than chain link that are 4 feet high. Those are not acceptable?
The additional foot, as well as the spear pointed aspects of the fence that we've selected, it only comes in a 5-foot option, but the additional foot, as well as the spear point at the top, also offers additional safety and security. It would be much harder to climb over the fence at that height.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming down and giving testimony.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak in favor of this application? I see no one. Anyone would like to speak against this application? I see no one. Let's close the public hearing. Board comment? Any board comment?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
I guess I'm really having trouble here, the difference between the 3-foot sides of the MPH building and the 2-foot size here, because this is 2 sides on a very busy street in a very active community where I can see security is a big deal. So I'm having trouble, especially because it's a transparent fence and it allows for people to see what's going on both outside the fence as well as inside the fence. I'm having a hard time, and I guess I would appreciate if someone would back up why we're negating the security on this one where we haven't on other ones that are public agency buildings.
I might take a stab at that. So the city has decided what height of a fence is safe for the front yard. They've already determined that. If there are some special circumstances or something unique about the property, then, which is the three front-facing sides of the other property, that's what makes it different than this particular property. But I think the safety is already built into the code. Mr. Eichholz?
I'm not, in terms of just like technically speaking, in terms of how the code is written and what we're looking for, I don't really see anything that's jumping out to me as a specific, unique aspect to this property. So I'm not really seeing any way to get to approving a variance on it for anything specific to the property. Seems like a choice from the owner, but in terms of what the code allows, I don't see anything that would get me to think that this is a unique aspect. So those are my thoughts currently.
Thanks for those comments. Other board comments? If there are none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move to adopt staff findings to deny the variance request.
Is there a second?
So moved.
It's moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Board Member Callahan?
Nay. Nay, sorry.
Eichholz?
Aye.
Krantz-Korsch?
Nay.
Ingram?
Aye.
Smikarova?
Aye.
There are 3 ayes and 2 nays.
That motion passes, and the request is denied. You can see staff about what your options are going forward. Thanks for coming down. Let's move on to the next item, which is an appeal of the zoning administrator. And before we start, is with all appeals of the zoning administrator, I'd like to say a little bit about, give some procedural notes. Appeals of the zoning administrator are not variances. They are also not determinations of whether to grant non-conforming use certificates. They're also something that we don't deal with, CUPs. The board's job is narrowly defined to determine whether the zoning administrator correctly interpreted and administered the current provision of the zoning ordinance that is the subject of the appeal. Furthermore, it's not the board's responsibility to determine whether the zoning ordinance is correct or should be changed. We are not a policy-making body. In appeals of the zoning administrator, we are not charged with determining the efficacy of city process. In this particular case, we are addressing a narrowly defined technical issue. Did the zoning administrator properly identify the use of the property as substantially similar to the classification of a contractor's yard or not? And with that, I'll hand it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Perry, members of the board. Tonight we have appeal of the decision of the zoning administrator on a use classification. The property is located at the corner of 27th Street East and 37th Avenue South. It is zoned PR1, production mixed use, and BFI3, interior 3, built 4. It is a one-story building with 2 tenants. The use in question, Superior Fence and Rail, and an art studio. The city has received numerous complaints about Superior Fence and Rail's operation beginning in the summer of 2023, including exterior storage of building materials and equipment, storage of materials in the right-of-way, and unloading and unloading and maneuvering of trucks in the right-of-way. They were issued a notice to correct for operating a contractor's yard without the required conditional use permit and directed to work with staff on that conditional use permit process, as well as a variance for the development standard of a contractor's yard to have exterior storage near residential uses. The property owner has proposed constructing an addition to the structure, enclosing the exterior space where the storage takes place, and indicated that they believe that with the removal of the exterior storage, the use would no longer constitute a contractor's yard and would instead be classified as warehousing and storage. The zoning administrator reviewed the proposal and the relevant code language and determined that even the elimination of exterior storage, the use of the property would still be substantially similar to a contractor's yard and would be classified as such by the city. The property owner has appealed that decision, arguing that it should not be classified as a contractor's yard after the addition because, one, the tenant does not provide contracting construction services, and that if the addition were constructed, there would be no exterior storage. The zoning code does contain definitions of contractor's yard, warehousing and storage, and contractor's office. And I can either read those or just display them again here. Let's see, where are we here? I apologize for the scrambled nature of the presentation as well. Mr. Fakota was unable to make it here tonight, and I'm kind of working off of his notes, and that's on me. Let's see. So with the definition of contractor's yard, we have, is that displayed? Okay, thank you. Let's see. So the zoning administrator's determination was based on some factors, taking into account the various definitions that you see in front of us. The Superior Fence and Rail purchased fence materials and received, store, and delivered them from the property using trailers on the property. Materials are delivered to fencing job sites where they are then installed by third-party contractors. And from the city's perspective, this is still considered to be a contractor, even though they're contracting out that final end part, they still are receiving, contractors will come and deliver and pick up materials, deliver the materials, et cetera. The company's website has extensive evidence of them operating as a fence contractor and considering themselves to be a fence contractor. I have example screenshots, but they are also in the staff report if you would prefer to see them that way, including a page here that describes, from their website, describing, what you should look for in a fence contractor, et cetera. So from the city's perspective then, after identifying a use as a contractor, it must then either be a contractor's office or a contractor's yard. And we'll note that a contractor's yard requires is a subset of a warehousing and storage use. So it is classified as warehousing and storage, but it is a specific use under that category and requires a conditional use permit where warehousing and storage does not in the PR1 district, which I think is one of the arguments the appellant's making and will better flesh out their argument.
Could you say that again, please?
So I apologize, I could bring up the use table if need be, but I didn't have a copy of it with me. A contractor's yard is a sub-use. So we have larger use categories, and warehousing and storage is one larger category. And then underneath that, there are specific uses that are underneath that, different types of warehousing and storage. And in this case, because it's a contractor, we've determined that it's a contractor's yard. So while most kind of general warehousing and storage uses don't require a conditional use permit, a contractor's yard does in this zoning district.
So, and I'm sorry for interrupting your presentation, but are you saying that, and this is an appeal of the zoning administrator's determination, so it's not a CUP, we don't do CUP, conditional use permits here, but could they pursue a conditional use permit and have that be a use that is allowed?
Chair Perry, yes. In fact, that is what we have been expressing them to do, to apply for a conditional use permit. And we have noted that if they get that, they still need a conditional use permit, whether or not they want to do that addition that has been proposed, that was mentioned earlier.
Okay,
so that's some of the crux of the argument. And
sorry for the interruption.
No worries. And so And so, contractor's yard, a contractor's office, I kind of split it on the two, kind of describe the contractor's yard. A contractor's office with no outdoor storage, often that is then considered to be a contractor's office, kind of the two separate categories. And that isn't a warehousing and storage use. One of the reasons we are unable to classify it here as a contractor's office is contractor's offices are prohibited from storing materials, equipment, or vehicles used for construction on site, whether that's inside or outside. And so that was a determination why, instead of saying, well, with no more outdoor storage, it would just drop down to a contractor's office. If we determined that, it would be prohibited at this location. And so from our perspective, the zoning administrator's perspective, it was better to continue classifying it as a contractor's yard, requiring that conditional use permit, where they would still be allowed to receive materials at the property. Let's see. And then, so for example, so when a use does not exactly fit a classification or definition in the zoning code, the zoning administrator must determine which use, if any, it is most substantially similar to, and if not substantially similar to an existing use in the zoning code, the use is prohibited. The zoning administrator determined that it is most similar to a contractor's yard, since it cannot be a contractor's office and receive materials, and it is not general warehousing and storage because it is specifically a contractor. And so with that, the planning department recommends that the Board of Adjustment deny the appeal.
Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Ellis. Are there questions of staff? Board Member Grant-Scorch.
I'm sorry to always be so slow, but I just want to understand that they still, if we uphold the zoning administrator's position, that they still can go for a conditional use in the future. Is that not correct?
Chair Perry, Board Member Grant-Scorch, that is correct. They
Okay.
would still have the opportunity to apply for a conditional use permit.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Ingram.
Thank you, Chair Perry. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. I was just curious about, so we're ruling on the current state, and how does the potential addition affect what we're doing right now?
Chair Perry, Board Member Ingraham, we're actually, in a sense, arguing over a future state. As it stands now, we do have evidence of them having some outdoor storage, and I believe there were photos in there, but I can also demonstrate, some continued photos as well. On that. So the kind of the argument is more around, if they build the addition, what would we consider them to be? And they would like to build the addition, I think, without the public hearing process and the conditional use permit. I will let of course, the appellant speak to that aspect of it. But that would be the main issue on that point, is whether they could then build that addition and whether they needed that conditional use permit or not post that addition if there were no outdoor storage on the property. Then the city has maintained that there would still maybe be some outdoor storage, and we've seen outdoor storage in the right-of-way and whatnot as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I see none. Thank you. Let's open the public hearing. Is the applicant or the appellant or their representative present?
Thank you, Chair
Name and
Perry,
address
members of the
for the
board.
record.
My name is Mark Theroff. I represent the owner of the property and the appellant in this proceeding. We are here this afternoon because my client wants to build an addition to this building that would enclose the area where the tenant has been using the area for outdoor storage, and to address some of the concerns that have been raised by the neighbors about the tenant's operations. My client engaged an architect to prepare plans for an addition, which we presented to staff. That addition could be constructed fully compliant with the zoning ordinance, not needing any variances or any approvals other than site plan approval. And we told staff that we believe that once the addition was completed, the use of the property would constitute warehousing and storage, which is a permitted use in the PR1 district. And so that all we would need would be site plan approval. Mr. Ellis then informed us that the zoning administrator had determined that the use would be a contractor's yard and not warehousing and storage. And I want to pause here about what we were told about the zoning administrator's determination. The zoning administrator's determination, which is in an exhibit to my application, was not a substantial similarity determination. We were told, the zoning administrator determined, this is a contractor's yard and will be a contractor's yard with the addition. We never asked for a substantial similarity determination, and one was never made. The first time we heard something about this being a substantially similar determination was in the staff report. And it's been presented to you that the issue on appeal is whether the use that we are proposing is substantially similar to a contractor's yard. And that is not the issue on appeal. That is not the issue that we appealed at all. We appealed the determination that this proposed use falls within the definition squarely of a contractor's yard. So I want to stress that at the outset because that's the issue that's before you tonight. We heard some information from staff just now and in the staff report about what was characterized as the tenant's website. You have information from a website owned, operated, and run by a national franchisor, the Superior Fence and Rail National Franchise, that has nothing to do with our tenant. You will not find our tenant's address in that website, our tenant's telephone number, our tenant's email address, anything. So the information that's been presented to you about our tenant's operations cannot be drawn from that website because it's some other company's website. But in reality, the nature of the tenant's business doesn't really matter because the question that you need to consider is what is the use of this property? Not what's the nature of the tenant or what industry is the tenant engaged in, but how is this property being used? And the nature of the use and how this property is being used is undisputed. There's no dispute as to what this tenant is doing on this property. The tenant takes delivery of bulk fencing materials. It stores and sorts them in the building. It loads them onto trailers, and it then delivers those materials to job sites. That is what happens in this building. It is also undisputed that there is no construction equipment of any type on this property, and that the tenant's business office isn't located on this property either. So when it comes to the use of the property, it's materials in and materials out, and that is it. And that becomes very important when we actually look at the definitions of these uses. And I hope I've got this done in a way that you can see them all at once. This doesn't seem to be on.
We can see it.
Oh, you can?
Sure.
Okay, 'cause it's not on that screen out there. Okay.
It is visible. I think it was just the angle. It is.
Oh, great. Thanks, Brad. Okay, so we have the uses that are in question here, and I've highlighted or emboldened the language that's important. So in contractor's yard, we have a two-part definition: an establishment providing general contracting or building construction services, and which involves outdoor storage of machinery or equipment. So even if we put aside this question of whether or not this company is engaged in contracting, it absolutely will not be having any outdoor storage of machinery or equipment once this addition is built. So it's squarely outside the definition of contractor's yard. There's no other way to read that definition. We don't have any outdoor storage. You have to have outdoor storage to fall into this definition. We actually believe that warehousing and storage is the most appropriate definition, and you can see there that that includes uses which are primarily related to the storage, sorting, packaging, or shipping of goods and materials. That's exactly what's going on this property and nothing else. Lastly, I've got a third one there, bulk goods sales. I've included this in case you are inclined to actually follow staff's suggestion that this is about a substantially similar use determination, because if you do, I actually think bulk goods sales is a better fit as well, better than contractor's yard. We've got uses that sell bulk goods to the public. Uses often support construction activity. Again, that's what's happening on this property. There is no outdoor storage, or won't be. It therefore isn't a contractor's yard. The last thing I'll point out is that you see in the examples of warehousing and storage, it says contractor's yards. So even if you were to somehow conclude that we fall in the definition of a contractor's yard, a contractor's yard is warehousing and storage. So we're right back to warehousing and storage. Now, I think there was a suggestion that this wasn't the intended outcome of how that would be applied and the use table and so forth. So on that point, I'm going to leave you with a quote from a seminal Minnesota land use case. It's the Frank's Nursery case. And I realize I'm not in court, so I'll appreciate you humoring me in just a little bit of case law. But this was a case it was a dispute between a property owner and a city as to what is a garden center. Frank's wanted to open a garden center on Fairview in Roseville, and the city said, nope, what you do is not a garden center. And the Minnesota Supreme Court said, when you've got a zoning ordinance and it's ambiguous, you have to apply it in favor of the landowner. And the key quote is here. It says, zoning ordinances should be construed strictly against the city and in favor of the property owner. And then about this case, it says, clearly the term lawn and garden center is susceptible of various interpretations that are more or less restrictive in scope. And then the court says, we must give weight to the interpretation that while still within the confines of the term, is least restrictive upon the rights of the property owner to use his land as he wishes. And that's black letter law in Minnesota. So we would submit to you that even if the example of contractor yard in warehousing and storage created some sort of ambiguity, that ambiguity has to be resolved in favor of the property owner. We clearly are not a contractor's yard because there won't be outdoor storage. So the only thing that's left in our estimation is warehousing and storage. And we ask for your support of our appeal.
Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
There may be questions. Are there questions? Yes, Mr. Eicholtz?
If so, does the company work directly with other contractors then, or do they work directly with like property owners, or who's typically is it business to business, business to to consumer?
The parties purchasing or getting the fences are primarily homeowners, almost entirely homeowners. There is some business to business sales of fencing materials, but it's a very small percentage of what they do.
Okay, so when somebody calls this business, they can get a quote and get the fence installed by this company.
The by this company part is a bit of a complication because the company provides the materials and that the labor is actually contracted out. No one employed by the company actually builds the fences.
So is that like a subcontractor that this company hires?
They are, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is to me that would mean this company was kind of acting as like either the contractor or kind of a general contractor in that circumstance. Okay, that helps me kind of understand how the business works in that. So.
Chair Perry, I've remembered one other thing there was a question before about, well, can't we just apply for a conditional use permit? And I definitely wanted to address that. Yes, that is a possibility. It was suggested that the issue there was whether or not we'd have to go through a public hearing process. That's absolutely not the issue. The issue is the expense. There are submission and application requirements in terms of consultants and engineers and others you have to engage when you apply for a conditional use permit that you don't have to incur when you're pursuing a permitted use. We have a permitted use here and would not have to go through all of that expense of thousands of dollars of preparing a conditional use application, and so that's the crux of that issue.
So that's why you're not pursuing a conditional use permit?
It's why we prefer not to, absolutely.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you for your testimony. We've received some letters from neighbors, and I know Mr. Ellis also alluded to this in his presentation about there's also external storage of materials on site, but there's also storage of materials that's happening in the right of way. And so one of the questions, you're talking about that you're going to build this structure that's going to then rectify a lot of the external storage needs. But can you talk about how do we know that there's going to not be storage of materials still externally, but in the right of way?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I want to be clear, I'm not representing to you that the enclosure would somehow include stuff going on in the right of way. Frankly, the right of way should not be being used for any kind of storage activities. The property owner is addressing that with the tenant. I do want to caution a little bit. There are lots of photographs of trucks and things making deliveries. We know from when we've received copies of those photos from staff and have immediately gone out there that those are short-term deliveries. I mean, a lot of those deliveries, there's no room for them to take place anywhere else than in the street. A truck will pull up, and while the truck is loading and unloading, it's there. It's not the case that you're getting, long-term truck parking or long-term storage in the right-of-way. It's that the materials have to get in and out of the building. So this application, regardless of which way we end up going, the right-of-way issue is going to have to be addressed. The city has tools for addressing that and is in the process of addressing that with the tenant, and we're fully cooperative with that and want to get that issue resolved as well. But it doesn't really have a bearing on this issue.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I see none. Thanks for your
Thank you.
testimony. Does anyone else like to speak in favor of the application? Or the appeal, I should say? Is anyone here to speak against? And you can just come up in whatever order you want and give your name and address for the record.
Chair Perry, members of the board. My name is Tom Layton. I live at 2652 38th Avenue South, which happens to be neighboring property to this business. I think I'd like to start where Mr. Thiroff left off, to say there's no room for deliveries to take place anywhere else besides the public right-of-way. Because I want to segue into the operational behavior of the business and the reason why it is appropriate to determine this use to be of a category that requires a conditional use permit. What we see many times a week is trucks large and small, many of them very large, parking on the street, parking in the middle of the street, parking on the side of the street, and a forklift truck comes out of the warehouse, and essentially the contractor's yard is the public right-of-way. And I think you have heard and probably will hear short stories about the impacts of living in a neighborhood that funnels to the park where a contractor's yard is essentially taking place on the public right-of-way, and the neighborhood are not wearing hard hats or have not signed any waivers or taken out special insurance. So there's I'm just going to be plain, there's a crazy amount of activity that happens many times a week with these deliveries. Truck pulls up, the fork truck, lift truck is out. Sometimes those trucks are parked for a long period of time, sometimes they're not. Sometimes materials are stored on the public right-of-way, sometimes they're on the site. The huge flatbed semis are some of the trucks, and then those depart the site through neighborhood streets that aren't truck routes. So as we've sort of connected with our neighbors about what they've experienced, just have heard story after story after story, and it's not a safe condition, and it's certainly not a neighborly. It's not neighborly behavior of a neighborhood that's at a particular site. In a mixed neighborhood of this kind. So you have received a lot of material, some pictures that are very evocative. The next thing I wanted to say is that I 100% agree with Mr. Thiroff's characterization that what's important is the use of the property. But he went on to say the business stores and sorts in the building, loads on trailers, and delivers to job sites. And what he failed to say is that much or most of that loading and storage does not happen in the building. And I think the final thing that I really want to underscore is sort of the purpose but for which the city of Minneapolis has created a distinction between certain uses being permitted uses and certain uses being conditional uses, because, and particularly in the most neighborhood compatible and adjacent industrial zoning districts, there are business types that could well be compatible neighbors in those I-1, I think it's called, zoning districts under certain conditions. And they should be reviewed for the conditions that are familiar in the zoning code related to ensuring the safety, ensuring traffic conditions, ensuring compatibility, not being detrimental to the value of neighboring properties. Be reviewed under those conditions if they're conditional use permits, and at times invited to operate given conditions that ensure those conditions. So one of the things, I think staff did a beautiful job saying it doesn't meet in a future condition. Without outdoor storage, it doesn't meet the strict definition of a contractor's yard, but yet it doesn't meet the strict definition of a contractor's office either, which is prohibited from keeping materials on site. And so we have to make a determination. We find it to be more similar to a contractor's yard. I think understanding the operational aspects of the deliveries, of the loading that happens there, and trucks coming in and out of the neighborhood without a lot of direction. We haven't seen a lot of change in the way this business operates over the last year while there have been complaints about it. Given that behavior of the general business operations, it seems to us very appropriate that it be considered a contractor's yard and be a type of business that requires a conditional use permit, which invites that additional level of oversight and thinking through what are the conditions that would make this a compatible neighbor. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. Any other comments? Yep. And name and address for the record, please.
Diane Brady Layton, 2652 38th Avenue South, live with the previous speaker. And I have a group of neighbors here, and we also have a longer list of neighbors. We have a listserv of approximately 15 to 20 neighbors. This has been really concerning, and I've written my statement here. I think it timed it out, takes a little less than 3 minutes, so if you'll hear me out, I appreciate it. So on July 1st of this year, approximately 1 year after I made my initial complaint about this business, the owner of the business, Jay Rain, approached me in my yard. I think his goal was to find out if I had put a negative review on Google, as he was very concerned that that was having a negative impact on his business. I told him I had not, but I could understand why someone would, and that I have considered it. He was apologetic about the negative impact his business was having on the neighborhood, and he said he planned to move the business to a more appropriate location, but that the owner of the building has not been amenable to working with him getting out of his lease. So at least of what he said, this business owner wants to move on, does not want to stay there, but is being blocked in that. I stressed to him the safety and the liability concerns about using the public street as his contractor yard to park and unload huge semis and to take material back and forth with forklifts. I also stressed the negative impacts of waking up neighbors as early as 4:30 in the morning. And he indicated he was aware of all these concerns and he understood them. I'm the one who sent you a whole bunch of photos and the explanation of the photos of what's happening. So I'm hoping all of you have seen them, and that's great. The attorney who was speaking on behalf of the building owner stated that this is quick, in and out, trucks come in and out. Well, it's not. These are huge semis, huge loads. I'm going to describe to you one afternoon, and this occurred over a period of 4 hours. And this was on 27th Street and 37th Avenue. The first huge, large semi rolled in the morning, parked on one side of the street, and was unloaded with a forklift that's going back and forth. Then the semi navigated to the other side of the street to load the second part of that. And then, lo and behold, a second semi pulls up, parks in the middle of the street, forklifts unloading onto the street. And this activity went on for 4 hours. But something really struck me, and I think you've got to understand this location. 27th Avenue curves. It's not a 90-degree turn, and it's the gateway to the Midtown Greenway and Brackett Park. This is a huge pedestrian area and a bike area. So as I'm watching all this happening, a woman comes on her bicycle out of the tunnel from Brackett Park with a baby on the back of her bike. And she's heading down 27th Street. And I think it's picture number 48. It's the only picture that's just branches. If you zoom onto that picture, you will see the woman on the bike. And then the pictures that follow that, I think there's 3 or 4 that follow that, show you what she was driving into. 2 huge semis, pallets on the ground, and a forklift. I have a hard time understanding how this is legal. And if the business was doing this in an enclosed contractor yard, would you allow cars and pedestrians and bikes to go through it? I don't think so. So I don't understand how this is okay on our city streets. So I support the city staff's finding as a first step in addressing these issues of concern with this business and its operation, and with the building owner who has chosen to bring in tenants that bring safety and livability concerns to this location. Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony. Anyone else like to speak? If you could give your name and address for the record, and if something has already been said, there's no need to repeat it.
Yes, thank you. My name's Jamie Monson. I live at 2633 37th Avenue South, and my home is 2 doors north of this business on 37th Avenue South. And I would like to say that when I first moved into my home last year, I spent a lot of time in the front yard of my home in some chairs and really enjoyed the peace and quiet of the street. And my street is a street that dead ends at the Greenway. And if you go there any day, especially right now as people are coming home, you will see children and bicycles and skateboards. They even have set up basketball courts so the kids can play in the street. It's a very safe space for kids to play. And since this business has been unloading trucks, that safety, I feel, is really compromised on our street, and our feeling of having a neighborhood. And I don't sit in my front yard anymore in my chairs and enjoy the shade of the big tree, because often during the day there are these big semis rolling back and forth. They're noisy, they back up, they block traffic, and it's just become a question of peace and security and safety for us and the quality of life that we love in Seward. And the early morning waking has definitely been a problem for me, and it's already been mentioned. And I just want to say that many of us love Seward because it's a mixed-use neighborhood. We're not opposed to having businesses mixing in with us. We have other businesses in the neighborhood that are appropriate for the kind of neighborhood that we want to have, which is a peaceful, safe neighborhood that has a good quality of life for everyone. So I just wanted to emphasize it's not that we're concerned about mixed use, it's the specific activities of this business that we feel are the problem. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your testimony. Thanks for coming down. And would anyone else like to speak? I see no one, so let's close the public hearing. I have a question of staff. I have a couple of questions of staff. One of the questions is that what is the actual cost for pursuing a conditional use permit?
Chair Perry, I would have to look that up.
Round numbers.
I can, it is based on the size of the lot. It's over $1,000.
Okay.
But
But it's not like $5,000.
Because, no, unfortunately, yeah. Variances tend to run in that range, but a conditional use permit is more expensive. I can look that up for you and give you the exact information on that if needed.
So the other thing is, there's been a question of whether, and you brought this up in the staff report, you said it in your testimony, of enclosing this area and it still being a contractor's yard. Can you go into a little bit more detail on that?
Chair Perry, there were two kind of aspects to that. One of which I noted was kind of the work and other things that are occurring in the right-of-way. The appellant noted that they are attempting to address that, but as it stands on a regular basis, we're still seeing that storage. And even if it's a relatively short-term storage, it's still sort of storage in the right-of-way, so using the public right-of-way for that. And then the other was, when we did the use classification, we had to classify it as something, and it didn't really meet the definition of either one of those contractors' ones. So contractor's yard seemed the most appropriate, since they wouldn't be allowed to receive materials if they were a contractor's office.
Right.
Did that answer your question, Chair Perry?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
So I have another question about a piece of evidence that the appellant's attorney presented, which was this case law that basically said that you had to defer to the the uses of the property. And is my understanding of the city's ordinances, if it's not in the code, it's not permitted. Is that correct?
Chair Perry, members of the board, yes, that is correct. I can pull up that exact section if you'd like, but when we're making a use determination, it doesn't fit any exact definition, and then the zoning administrator the zoning administrator must determine whether it's substantially similar to something else. In this case, it didn't fit either one of those definitions, and so the zoning administrator determined that it was still considered to be a contractor's yard.
So one of two things happens. It's either not permitted, or it is found to be substantially similar to something that is in the code.
That is correct.
Okay.
And the appellant is suggesting that it is warehousing and storage. The zoning administrator said it is actually most substantially similar to the contractor's yard,
Right.
Which is a subcategory.
So I think
of that.
that's the nub of the issue.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any questions of staff or other board comment? Yes.
So when we're looking at something like this, we're looking at the property line specifically, but like what happens when we're talking about something that's outside of that, like a public right-of-way?
Chair Perry, Board Member Ingraham, that is one of the things that we've had on an ongoing issue, and is one of the issues that we're having in terms of our enforcement related to this, is that, normally we're looking at it completely within the bounds of when I say we, the zoning section, zoning enforcement, we're looking at it within the bounds of the property, and when it's outside that, you're looking at another arm of the city, usually public works, traffic and parking services, something along those lines. Traffic has been aware of some of these complaints. They're, can write orders related to some of especially around the trucks and the truck movement. But as a result, we have still been classifying it kind of this way because we're seeing some of that even being stored off property. It does fall into a kind of an odd gray area, though. It's not as easy as an enforcement case as we would normally have if it were occurring all in one location on that property.
Thank you.
All right. Any other board questions, comments? I would entertain a motion. Yes.
I just wanted to note, just for, I forget what it's called. I work adjacent to an organization that is responsible for some of this, but I'm not benefiting from any of this. Whatever that's called. What is that called?
Conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest. I don't have a conflict of interest, but I'm kind of associated by some weird ways. I would move the zoning administrator's findings. I think that it is a contractor's yard, and I think a contractor's yard is a kind of warehouse and storage. And so I do think that that's the appropriate read of the use of the space, and all of the other unfortunate characteristics and details have to do with other things that are wrong, other departments that need to be engaged. But it seems very clear to me that it's a contractor's yard. And so I would move for the zoning administrator's findings.
All right, there is a motion. Is there a second?
I would second.
And there's a second. Is there discussion on the motion? Mr. Ingram?
I just want to make sure, so the current state, I think I agree. So would that still be the state in the future if it was all enclosed, do you think?
I think that they are currently storing things in the yard, so enclosing that storage doesn't change the existence of storage. And so I don't think that it changes in the future if they were to build or get the rights to build something else on the site, the addition on site.
So you're saying that it would still function as a contractor's yard, even enclosed? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I would also agree. I think to echo that, the level of activity that's being used on the site, to me, indicates more an appropriate usage for a contractor's yard versus warehouse and storage. And also, given the nature of the questions asked by Board Member Eichholz in terms of the nature of the business, yes, it's not necessarily about the nature of the company, but in terms of how the business is being used, I agree it seems more similar to a contractor's yard, whether or not the yard is enclosed.
Thanks for those comments. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Board Member Callahan.
Aye.
Eichholz.
Aye.
Ingram.
Nay?
Smikarova.
Aye. Aye.
There are 3 ayes and 1 nay.
The motion passes, and the appellants can see staff as to what their options are going forward. Is there any new or old business? There is none. And our next meeting is on July 25th, 2024. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
It's moved and second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.